Hi. Hi, everybody.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can start it now. Hi.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sorry
For,
for being little late.
so we were waiting for you. Thank you so much. So now she's joined.
Yes.
So may I formally start the webinar. And as I said, thank you so much again for the Yeet Foundation for organizing this very important youth webinar on sustaining economy, public health, and environment for the future of humanity. In context to the current global crisis, COVID. So as we know that this is a very tough time, very serious time for all of us, very challenging for all, especially the civil society, where we have been discussing that most of the events have, apart from impacting the people and loss of economy, this has also impacted the regular movement of people and our regular working scenario. And I would just like to begin with this that today that the we have about 3 million people suffering from this from COVID, and we have seen some of the countries who are really taking very good measures. And today I was just reading about Japan, where there are two versions. The government of Japan is going to lift the whole emergency situation from Japan, where they will open everything. But the civil society have a different view. They say that the proper testing is not done, and Japan is one of those countries where, being the developed country, about 0.2% of the people have only been tested for COVID. So imagine, and there are people who are coming up, they have symptoms for COVID, but the doctors are telling them that now the COVID testing is closed. So they cannot even be tested for COVID. So these are some situations that I wanted to highlight here. And I think it's very important for we as civil society, as a youth, and how do we respond to this challenge. And one of the other thing that I wanted to highlight here is the digital divide, because the physical presence is changed now. We are all digitally trying to connect. There are many people, I'm sure, who would not who are not in a good situation, and who do not have good connectivity, and who cannot even connect to such a virtual digital platform. So how do we make sure that we respond and we communicate, and how do we assure all the voices? So I think it's very important. And now we have seen that the apart from pandemic, we have had Amphan, which hugely impacted Bangladesh and parts of Eastern Asia, India, and we have had immense damage. So when this kind of pandemic is also accelerated by such a disaster, and we know that these disasters are not the normal ones. We see every year, we see such disaster that coming every year. So I think this is a very important time, very important time for all of us to take to talk together, to communicate, and to come forward with some measure. And the role of youth, how can youth play such an important role? And this is also impacting obviously the economic activity. So without taking much time, I would like to welcome all of you. And so I would also want to welcome Ms. Rubina Adhikari, who is the program associate from Environment Program, Yeet Foundation, to welcome and give a highlight. Thank you so much, Rubina.
Hello, thank you, Mrs. Josna, sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So, hello everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we
Please
do.
go on, we can hear you finely.
So, hello everyone. I'm Rubna Adhikari from Wi-Fi Foundation. Welcome in the part 3 of a youth webinar on sustaining economy, public health, and environment for the future of humanity. We are very pleased with the responses we have gotten so far, and I hope this webinar will do the same. Today, we shall be having interactions on climate change, biodiversity, disaster risk reduction, and sustainable energy in light of COVID-19 crisis. This online webinar is a joint initiative and co-organized by Youth for Environment Education and Development Foundation, Wi-Fi Foundation, and the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, UNFGCY. Today, we have 4 speakers. They are Mrs. Hindu Ibrahim. She is UNST's advocate and expert member of United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, UNPFII. There's a slight change here. Mrs. Anita could not be available, so we have Mrs. Christian Mortality, who shall be giving her presentation. She is working as Environmental Affairs Officer and Engineer in United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and Pacific, UNESCAP. Ms. Saila Sahid, she is Senior Advisor, working in climate change, DRR, and gender International Center for Climate Change and Development. And Mrs. Maria Pastukova, she is Doctoral Fellow and Project Associate, working in German Institute for International and Security Affairs, SWP. We will have panel discussions and then we will move towards question and answer section. So make sure you stick till the end. Then the session will be ended by some synthesis and some call for actions by Mr. Joshua. He is Executive Director of Green Africa Youth Organization. That's it, so enjoy and let us hope that we all learn something new today. Thank you. Go ahead, Mrs. Josna.
Thank you so much, Rubina, for highlighting the whole program here. And I think this is time for a group screenshot of photos, which is a very innovative thing, just like coming from the youth. So may I request all of you to kindly switch on your camera for this group picture. And also, I would just, after we click the picture, and please let's put off our camera and mute, and please mute yourself because this might create a networking problem. Thank you so much. Let's on all of your cameras. And who's clicking the picture? So maybe.
Please, our technical team, please be ready for a wave screenshot. Over. Krishna, Kusal, Utsav, are we done with the screenshot?
I think we are done.
Okay, ma'am, you can take over, okay?
I'm sorry, but you mute.
Oh, thank you so much for highlighting. So as I said that, so we'll start the session now. So our first speaker is Ms. Hindu Kumaro Ibrahim, who is UN SDG advocate and expert member of United Nations Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues from Chad, Africa. So may I request Ms. Hindu please to please join and share your experience. Thank you so much. Ms. Hindu, can you hear me? Do we have Ms. Hindu here in the panel here? Is she present?
Jyotsna, ma'am, I think she's not available right now. I think you need to move on with next speaker.
Okay.
As she will be joining us later, we are still contacting her, so.
Okay. So thank you so much. So our next speaker would be Mr. Christian from UNESCAP, and who's going to speak on biodiversity and COVID-19 crisis. May I request Mr. Christian to please come on and deliver your speech.
I'm going to try to share my screen. Can you see the screen or?
Yes, we can see. Please proceed.
Okay. So hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here. I hope you can hear me well. Unfortunately, Ms. Aneta Nikolova is unavailable, so I'll be giving the presentation on her behalf. And as just a quick introduction, my name is Christian Mortaliti, and I'm a contractor at the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia Pacific in Bangkok. I work at the Environment Development Division under Ms. Aneta. So we'll be giving you a quick presentation on biodiversity and COVID-19. So I just want to start you all with a quick quote from the United Nations Environment Program that says, "The coronavirus pandemic is reminding us that we live in a connected world. It's an opportunity to revisit our relationship with nature and to rebuild a more environmentally responsible world." So just as a quick overview of biodiversity in the Asia-Pacific region, the Asia-Pacific region is a diverse and vast landscape containing many ecoregions from tundra to rainforest and everything in between. And the region is home to 17 out of 36 of the world's global biodiversity hotspots, as well as 7 out of 17 of the world's megadiverse countries. In addition to hosting the highest marine biodiversity out of any region, Asia Pacific contains as well the highest number of species in the world. For example, the Southeast Asia subregion has the greatest diversity of mammals, birds, and amphibians, and many endemic bird and plant species. So some of the global biodiversity frameworks include the Convention on Biological Diversity and the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, amongst others. So on the whole, unfortunately, biodiversity is declining in the Asia-Pacific region, which is also home to the largest number of threatened species on Earth. And according to the Biodiversity Intactness Index, which uses local terrestrial ecological assemblages to map how land use pressures have affected the number of species found in a local area, some areas of the Asia-Pacific region have a biodiversity intactness of less than 60%. So here you can see a regional snapshot of the Biodiversity Intactness Index for the Asia-Pacific region. And you can see that the steppe and Palearctic ecoregions of Central and Northeast Asia are particularly impacted by biodiversity loss. And as a whole, the region is under significant biodiversity stress. So there are many threats facing biodiversity. The largest perhaps is habitat loss / degradation, which is caused by deforestation, agricultural activity, hydropower damming, mining, urbanization, and inland and coastal erosion, amongst other factors. Climate change also poses a significant threat due to rising temperatures, desertification, and wildfires that may kill or render a species' habitat uninhabitable. Other threats include harmful fishing practices, marine and terrestrial pollution, demand for wildlife products, including poaching, which we will talk about later in this presentation, and invasive species. So, using again the example of Southeast Asia, this, subregion of fantastic biological diversity is now also seeing some of the highest deforestation rates in the globe. So just a quick overview of biodiversity in the context of COVID-19. So, while this pandemic has, on one hand, shown us all great suffering, it's also shown a lot of hope. And because of, the decreased human activity as a result of lockdowns, I'm sure you're all aware that, social media news outlets are, buzzing with reports of animals moving into these human spaces that were previously stripped of their biodiversity. However, from an objective conservationist standpoint, it is important to differentiate between those reports that are false and those that are accurate. Nonetheless, this decrease in human activity highlights important gains for biodiversity that can be carried going forward in the post-lockdown world. For example, given the impacts of climate change and pollution on biodiversity, there can be many positive gains for biodiversity as a result of reductions in carbon emissions and air pollution if we take this momentum forward. Additionally, shifts in consumption and production patterns that have occurred during this pandemic have forced us to kind of reconsider our unsustainable consumption and production habits, that have had, terrible effects upon natural life, particularly in the Asia Pacific region. Through this, we can kind of lay down a blueprint forward to address the average regional regressions that have been seen in SDGs 12 on responsible consumption and production and SDG 13 on climate action, as well as for accelerated progress in SDG 14 on healthy oceans and 15 on life on land. So, if anything good comes out of this pandemic, it is that it's like a unique opportunity to restructure economic and financial models and to mainstream biodiversity across public and private sector planning. COVID-19 has also called attention to the need to restructure these models in a way that include critical environmental and social safeguards. However, the global recession that's been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic presents complications in the mobilizing the necessary resources to address biodiversity loss, which are substantial. And in addition, COVID-19 has disrupted what was to be a major year for biodiversity policy and planning in 2020. Biodiversity is an issue of what's called the global environmental commons, as biodiversity is greatly impacted by shared resources such as high seas, atmosphere, and transboundary rivers and forests, for example. Similarly, COVID-19 is a transboundary issue and likewise requires coordinated and integrated global responses. Therefore, the COVID-19 crisis also provides an opportunity to build off the growing interest in transboundary collaboration for protecting areas of high biodiversity. The COVID-19 crisis, has also exposed the vulnerabilities of the global food systems. As such, this presents another unique opportunity to kind of evaluate and effectively address these emerging vulnerabilities. And when addressing this, I think it will be important to highlight the role of preserving biodiversity in agriculture. The health of crops, livestock, and agricultural land itself are influenced by an enormous range of ecological processes, many of which are quite complex and not well understood, that are all driven by a diversity of species, whether they be plants, animals, or microorganisms. So without biodiversity in agriculture, we may in fact be facing a future food crisis that is similar, if not worse, than the one that we are facing today. So integrated solutions are key to responding to the challenges of now. While the source of COVID-19 is not yet determined definitively, there's a high probability that the virus, in fact, originated from the trade and consumption of wildlife that is rampant across Asia. So this calls attention the risks associated with the import, trade, and or consumption of exotic and often threatened animal species that may carry rare infectious agents. So, the related SARS coronavirus was, for example, a zoonotic disease transmitted through animals to people. So, therefore, banning the trade of wild animals not only prevents future outbreaks, but will put an end to, one of the contributing factors to biodiversity loss, which is poaching and trade of wildlife. So already in light of COVID-19, we've seen that China has advanced a ban on wildlife trade, and other countries are also following suit. So, however, though, the mass migration of people from cities to villages and the crashed economy as a result of COVID-19 may put additional pressures on bushmeat as a food source in low-income areas. So that can actually have negative impacts on poaching. So there have also been, reports that the virus may be increasing the demand for traditional medicine that include wildlife products sourced from threatened species such as bears, pangolins, and rhinoceroses, amongst others. Meanwhile, there are also fears that drop-offs in tourism revenues, in Africa, for example, may increase poaching in what are now quiet, protected areas. In addition, the fate of threatened species in exotic zoos remain unclear in light of the absence of business and upkeep costs. Last, I want to call attention to the relationship between COVID-19 biodiversity and women. So it's important to note that women occupy key responsibilities in conserving and protecting the global environmental commons, such as biodiversity. And this is a role that's often not acknowledged properly. However, the United Nations has noted that the COVID-19 crisis has had a disproportionate effect upon women, aggravating the existing inequalities and therefore inhibits their full participation as actors in the preservation of the global environmental commons and biodiversity. So with that, the presentation is over, and I would like to thank you all for your attentiveness, and I want to leave you again with another quote from the United Nations Environment Program. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. This is wonderful. And just a few takeaways that we are losing on biodiversity, and there is a positive impact on goal 12, 13, 14, and 15. So that's a good news. But I really like your last point about the women who are accounting for more of the unpaid labor, and they are the ones who are responsible for conserving the biodiversity and the environment. They are yet not counted formally. So I think it's very important topic, very important highlight, and I would really want to take it forward. And and I also thank you so much for just being in time. And I would just say that I would request the speakers to limit their presentation within 10 minutes. So that would be really nice. And so I would just want to know if Miss Hindu is here in the panel. Is she here?
Yes, she is there.
Okay. Thank you so much. So may I request Ms. Hindu to please present on climate change and COVID crisis. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you very much, everybody. Maybe he can just... Okay. Thank you so much. It's really a great pleasure to be with you, and sorry to miss the time. As an indigenous person, I do not know the time zone, and then that was the reason why I didn't come earlier. So it's really a great pleasure to be with all of you there, and thanks for the previous presenters on biodiversity and COVID. So as I'm coming from an indigenous communities who are Mbororo pastoralists in Chad, so we live across 5 countries: Chad, Cameroon, Niger, Nigeria, and Central African Republic, and my peoples are nomadic. And being in the Sahel, that's why like having the climate change impact, we are living it in our daily base. It's based on our natural resources that's shrinking every time and creating a conflict between communities. So as a SDG advocate and as also indigenous leaders, so I have been fighting for the climate change to give the evidence on the impact for many years by giving the example of how my communities are living. So I just leave you with a few examples of how we are impacted by the climate change. In my lifetimes, it was in 30 years ago, like we do depend from a source of water who's called it a Lake Chad. I don't know, maybe some of you know and others not. So Lake Chad used to be more than 25,000 kilometers squares of the fresh water, where there are more than 40 million people live and depend on it, and one of them are my peoples. And actually now, in just like less than a generation, the lake shrinks to 90%. So it's just about 2,000 kilometers squares of water that remain. And you can imagine the water is just evaporated. And that's create a conflict between the communities fighting to access these resources. And that's also the reason where the food insecurity become very high on the regions. But at the same time, as indigenous peoples, we do not have access to the hospitals, access to the education. So we use our indigenous people's traditional knowledge to get adapt and mitigate to each of all the impacts that we live on it. For example, like our cattle, when they move from one place to another one, during the entire year, they can move up to 1,000 kilometers. So they can give the break to the ecosystem to get regenerated in a natural way. So I used to give the example, my grandmother can be the best app ever. She can tell you if it's going to rain in the next 2 hours, or if the rain season will be good the next year or not, just by observing her environment, observing her natural ecosystem. So like the birds migrations, the cloud position, the wind directions, and then the site of fruits, the production of the animals. So that gives us the information to better adapt and mitigate to the climate change. And then we use those solutions. So that's one of the climate impact and the solution we are using in the indigenous communities. And it is the same in many other indigenous peoples, like when you go to the Amazon, is the most diverse ecosystem in indigenous place. When you go to Himalaya, you know how peoples can get adapt to the high mountain, to also the high cold, and where they can get food when it is very snowing. So it is the same in many different indigenous communities and culture. But with the COVID-19 now, I think the crisis have many. Someone talking? Okay, so I think COVID-19 and climate crisis have many points in common. And one of them, it's COVID-19, and it's hitting the most vulnerable communities and the most vulnerable countries. It is the same like the climate change. Maybe for the people who do not speak, if you can just mute your. Thank you. You hearing me now? Thank you. So yeah, so the point in common between COVID-19 and climate crisis, it's that both of them are hitting the most vulnerable communities and then the most vulnerable countries. And then COVID-19 is creating a food insecurity, and climate change also creating a food insecurity. And another very interesting point in common between COVID-19 and climate change is the woman leadership. So at this time now, like in my country and in my region in Africa, all the towns are locked down, as many places in Africa. So while the community depend from the daily exchange of them product in order to eat tomorrow, so they can't get access to the market. And that's just to reduce all the economy they have at the communities, and then it's make them more vulnerable, and people do not get access to the food. So that's creating the food insecurities. And while the rain season is starting now, so all the crops and all the revenue that people saved during the last year are ending now, and they don't have the new crops. So that makes them again double vulnerable during this COVID crisis. And another thing is, while they do not have access to the technology, to the climate solution, to the clean energy, they do not have also access to the hospitals. Even if there is someone who contracting the pandemic, they cannot get a help to get these people at the hospitals. It is the same in my community, but it is also same in the Amazon, that where we are exchanging with our colleagues. There is no hospitals, and we are the most impacted if there is just one person who contract the pandemic. It will be very easily all the communities get contaminated, and then there is no solutions. If they need a ventilators, there is no hospital, there is no electricity, how they can get access to it. It is the same that the climate impact that we are experiencing. And the good news is, while there is no solution for the climate change, we are using our traditional knowledge. It is the same for the COVID. So people do not have a medicine for the COVID, but we just like try to heal a symptom of the COVID. When someone has a headache, we turn up to the traditional knowledge that we can give him the medicine. If they have like a problem to breathe, if they have any of the symptoms, so we try to heal the symptomatic things that the people do have in order to wait for the global solution that can come. So what we need to remember as human beings, nature, it's our pharmacy. The molecule that develop each modern medicine or traditional medicine coming from the nature. So the time that we protect our environment, that we're protecting our health, we're protecting our food system. So indigenous peoples are the best one because we protect more than 80% of the world biodiversity. Even we are 5% in this earth. So we do have a different knowledge based on the ecosystem that we have. So if our rights are respected, our knowledge are recognized and valued, so indigenous peoples can be a base of the solution to the climate change, and they can help also restore the biodiversity that can limit the pandemic that coming, and then prevent us for the next future pandemic that coming up. And we all know we do have only 10 years. So 10 years to act in climate issues, 10 years to act as SDGs. And we all know that the world can shift in very radical way, and that show it up in the COVID-19, how the solidarity is start to become cross-border, cross-community, cross-neighbors, even cross-families. So all the funding mechanism that is there for the COVID, they can invest it on all the sustainable development goals to do not leave anyone behind, including indigenous peoples, and that we can create a best world for all of us. And who can do that? Not more than youth, not more than women. And the world have all these resources. We might do that all together by respecting each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hindu, for a very, very good and inspirational speech, because yes, we completely understand the role of indigenous people. Yes, you rightly said 5% of the total population on the globe, and it's preserving 80% of the total biodiversity, and your knowledge and intellect is immense. We have seen in the different parts of the countries with whatever little experience that I have. So yes, we tremendously value your wisdom and knowledge, and we hope that we take your findings and your thoughts forward, and this is a great responsibility for the youth of this globe to respect the rights of indigenous people and take their wisdom and values forward. Thank you so much again. And so now we have the next speaker, my dear friend from Bangladesh, Ms. Shaila Shaheen, who is also advisor climate change, DRR and gender, and of International Center for Climate Change and Development. And Shaila, all yours, and look forward to hearing.
May I have my presentation? Okay, just let me allow to show my presentation. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. This is Shaila Shahid speaking from Bangladesh. I work as senior advisor to the International Center for Climate Change and Development. I'm also one of the advisory board member of the stakeholder engagement mechanism of the United Nations Office on Disaster Risk Reduction based in Geneva. And I have been long engaged working on climate change, disaster risk reduction, and gender mainstreaming issues. So it's my immense pleasure to talk with you and share my experience in terms of youth engagement in tackling the COVID-19 crisis and disaster issues. So again, before giving my overview, Eid Mubarak to you all, because here in Dhaka, we are all celebrating the Eid, but it's a very unusual time and a situation we are all going through. So you all know that the COVID-19 crisis, it's a very, the worst ever pandemic disaster that humanity is confronting. And also it has created a kind of unprecedented negative impacts all over the countries globally. And now the question is how the youth are coping with all through this process. And I'm going to give an overview about the role of youth and also what's the dimensions, what's the leadership, what's the aspects that the youth are bringing in that process of coping with and confronting and combating this pandemic disaster that is in many contexts, it is also aligned with climate-induced disaster. So it's a kind of double burden that at this moment we are facing and going through. So let me first start with that. What are the COVID-19 and climate-induced disaster push factors that actually, I mean, somehow pushing us at the end of the age? So you can see this is the situation and challenge of dealing the crisis of triple burden. It's the poverty. People already became very poor because of this lockdown since couple of months globally. The situation is very bad, and there are not only the youth are being impacted, there are other issues, I mean, the hunger, the crisis that actually risen to an unprecedented level. And again, when we also see that not only that, that we are dealing with this pandemic, but at the same time, it's the crisis of climate change, the crisis of disaster issues, the natural hazards that we have been dealing with since long. And the situation becoming very worse. And we also know that this is, risk is a very systematic way this is coming, but the crisis and the impacts are cascading. So we need to have a kind of multi-sectoral and multi-hazard approach how to address these emerging issues of this kind of situation. And this sort of disaster also rapidly producing further disaster to become more complex, and sometimes it's very deadly. And then we have the situation of increasing frequency of extreme events and hydrometeorological hazards that also impacting millions and billions of youth globally. There are decreasing productivity and increasing health risks. Although at this moment we know that the science is saying that youth are a little bit in a better position in terms of being infected by this pandemic, but also because of their connection to the family, to their schools, to their education, and all other issues. I mean, that intersectional issues also come to this point. And this is also very disappointing for them to cope with this complex scenario, because they haven't experienced this sort of scenario before. There are rising insecurity, like youth employment also. We see that youth, not only the study, the young people and the young generation who are also involved in the employment issues, they are now in the lockdown situation. Lots of people lose their job. There are insecurity on life, property, investment, and status. Everyone is affected, but not everyone is equally affected. So there comes that how unequally our structural barriers impacts the people in different dimensions. And I like to give an example from the Bangladesh perspective that COVID-19, from a very recent survey, we found that COVID-19 pushed 8.7 million youths into poverty. And we can imagine that the global scenario is even worse. And for many youth and children, also we have the information and evidence that school closures create major disruption for education, and they also used to have tiffin from the schools, so at least one-time food support from the schools in many countries, and that also closed because of this situation, and that exacerbated the inequality, not only in terms of reduced interaction with school people and fellow students and all this, but it's also creating another level of impediment of access to school meals and social care and its future attainment. So now coming to the point of seeing actually how climate-induced disaster and youth are interacting together in this overall scenario. And you can imagine that, thank you also, my previous two speakers very clearly defined the whole situation of youths in the climatic movement. And you can imagine that the youth are the primary stakeholders of the medium term. And if we consider the future scenario, so from this this time to the next 5 to 50 years, they are going to deal and lead the whole process of the global systematic situation and everything. And in this 5 to 50 years, next 50 years, the whole scenario in the global context, environmental degradation, and that is coupled with the climate change unprecedentedly. So this will have a greatest impact for them. And in contrast, coming to our points, that today's adults are the main stakeholders at this moment when the climate change is already getting severe. But when climate change becomes more severe and more worse, because we can predict that for the next 20 to 30 years, it is going to have a very worse impacts over the planet, over the people. So that time the today's adults will return and they will have little reason to care. They will not need to cope with that significant level of negative impacts of climate change in future. And that is also evident that since the last more than 2 to 3 years, we have seen a huge rise of youth mobilizations and protestations for the climate change, and asking for accountability of the global leaders, that they want their commitment, their aspirations, and that commitment means actually to act on, to reduce the global temperature, to act on at the national level. So that also come to the point that what sort of support and what sort of strength and resources that youth can offer to us. So we also feel that youth are at this moment, they are the most fresh and precious resources where we need to invest for our future betterment. Are the best change agents, most.
Hello, can you all hear me?
Yes,
Yes, we can
yes.
hear you.
I think we
Yes,
lost
yes.
Shaila. Have we lost Shaila?
Yeah, I'm back.
Shaila,
I'm
Okay,
going
okay.
we missed you.
yeah, sorry, my connection was a little bit disrupted,
It's
but
okay, it's
I'm going
okay.
to finish very soon. So. So how youth can be engaged in preparedness, prevention, response, and recovery process. And I also like to recall that we have the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the SFDRR, that clearly articulated some specific guidelines how the youth can be involved and mobilized in all through the process of disaster risk reduction and climate change related mobilization. So the first thing, I think that's very important, that the youth, they become very conscious and they also follow certain guidelines and principles. I mean, youth need to follow the simple and routine World Health Organization's guideline. That's very important, because in the social media, we also see different levels of rumor that's spreading out. I mean, that can create some sort of misconception for the youth to act in a responsible manner and in an efficient way. And then youth can be the change agent and community advocate to spread awareness on COVID-19 and disaster crisis at various levels of preparedness measure. And that's very important, that how we can invest on youth to amplify their voice and to create space for them for their meaningful participations, any sort of community level decision making, be it at the local level, at the regional level, national level, and also globally. We saw that there are very incredible youth climate champion, disaster champion. They are striving and they are raising their demands for the global leaders to act on. So that's very important that there is also immense scope to invest on youth, to empower them. And there are issues that youth can come up with lots of innovations in the whole process of risk reduction and climate change adaptation. And there are technological aspects where this current level youth group, they are very much acquainted with, they love to act on this. So we need to tap on those kind of resources and the interest level from the youth. And youth can also play a role educating their families, their friends and communities, spreading community awareness online and offline. And we also saw the evidences and they have already proven to be very efficient in terms of spreading all these sort of messages at the community level. There are different community groups globally, they are working on these. And then in terms of disaster risk reduction, there are a huge force of volunteer exists globally. There are Red Crescent, Red Cross volunteers. And not only this, they can also find opportunities to volunteer at the community level. There can be example that if there are older people or immunocompromised people, they can extend their help for them. They can also help out vulnerable people in their community to pick up their groceries and medicines. I think the youth are doing that at this moment. They're creating the change. They're bringing their force and support into that process. They can also join force with DRR volunteers. Globally, if I give example from the Bangladesh context, we have more than 56,000 climate change and community preparedness program volunteer who are very active in our coastal community to extend any sort of support when there is any disaster. So this sort of volunteer group and force, they are really contributing a lot in terms of extending support to this generation. And finally, this is the very foremost issues that youth are doing, and they are inspiring us. That's very commendable act they are doing. They can also hold the government accountable. They can also hold the global leader accountable. I strongly believe that the movement and the voice and the mobilizations from the Greta Thunberg, that's really contributed a great to a great extent to all over for mobilizing climate change related voice from the youth. And we also know, because whenever I talk about Greta or any other youth champion, we also know that the focus should not be only to the Greta, because there are millions of Greta exist from all over the world. So we also need to minimize the gap between the north and south. We also need to minimize the gap between the digital divide. We also need to invest all those thousands and millions of Greta young boys, young girls, and adolescents who are equally enthusiastic to put any sort of effort, their best effort, into this whole process of risk reduction and to act on climate change adaptation at the community level. So that actually the responsibility lies on the national level government, how they can bring and equally focus on this hard to reach areas and all these structural equality issues in their community at the very local level. So that's very important. But the youth can come forward and they can form their own group. They can spread the reliable information. They can invest in science and to act on universal health coverage, and all through this DRR process. So by this way, I know that the changes is happening. The youth, they have come forward in different contexts, and they are always very active to put their effort. But at the same time, from the adult side, I think we need to invest in the young generation for their leadership, because that's the very crucial time. We need young people's leadership now more than ever, because without their support, we cannot bring the desired change. So that's from all my side, and I really believe that with their support into the workforce, definitely we would be able to win the battle. We definitely would be able to lose and to stop the spread of this sort of virus and can bring momentum for disaster risk reduction at the very local community level and also at the global level. So thank you very much for being with me, and I look forward to other presentations, and I look forward for young people's and youth leadership in all the process of development arena. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shaila, for your very, very good and inspirational presentation on the role of youth. Yes, we have huge responsibilities on youth, and they are playing major roles in different sectors, and especially their roles in contribution in the environment sector is very, very appreciated. And without wasting much time, I would just like to go to our last presenter of this session, Mr. Maria Pastukova, who is a doctoral fellow and project associate, German Institute of International and Security Affairs, Berlin, Germany, to speak on sustainable energy and COVID-19 crisis. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone. I'll just try to share my my screen. Let me know if it works.
Sorry, I just missed. It's Miss Maria. Thank you.
No problem. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, not yet.
Oh, should be working actually. Let me try it again. No, maybe?
Yes, we can see you.
Okay. So, hello everyone, and thank you for having me here today. Just a short introduction of my institute, because I mean, it's not from Asia and Pacific, though I personally come from the Asian region. I come from Siberia. I was born there in the far eastern Russia. The Institute for International Security Affairs, SWP, advises political decision makers on international politics and foreign and security policy. First of all, the main client is, of course, the German government and Bundestag, but also other relevant international organizations such as the European Union, NATO, and the United Nations. Before I start the presentation on the topic, I would like to make two very major points. First of all, why is it important at all to talk about the energy system and the impact of COVID-19? We have to keep in mind that energy services are key to preventing disease and fighting pandemics, ranging from powering healthcare facilities and supplying clean water for essential hygiene, to enabling communications and IT services that connect people, which is particularly important while maintaining social distancing. So we really have to consider how the energy sector will evolve after the COVID-19 crisis. Second, I would like to underline that the energy system does not exist in the vacuum. And while I will primarily talk about the direct impact of COVID-19 on the energy sector, we have to keep in mind that there are many more indirect consequences resulting from the impact on societies, economies, and other industry sectors. The world's energy system is complex and interlinked, and the impacts the impacts one sector may have on another aren't always immediately obvious. So the figures and forecasts we have right now for energy sector may change in the short to midterm. As a political scientist, I'm glad to offer you a very brief presentation of the status quo of the global energy sector with some general advice for governments and communities as how to proceed with supporting the sustainable energy development. And I'm very happy to discuss further implications for the civil society and youth and in the Q&A session, and also look forward to your feedback and impressions. So as for the contents, firstly, I will very shortly take you through the impact of COVID-19 on the traditional, that is fossil fuel markets, and show some short and midterm negative effects on the global energy system, and then talk in more detail about the future and implications for the low carbon energy system with some advice, as I said, for the governments and communities. COVID-19 has in fact been somewhat of a perfect storm for the fossil fuel energy markets. The main reason for that being the unprecedented decline in demand for mobility. About 57% of global oil demand is in the transport sector, and which has shrinked on average 50% between the late 2019 and the end of March 2020. You see this curves, the upper picture is for the aviation industry, the picture below it is for the railroad and passenger transport. So you see very, very abrupt a decline in demand for mobility, which has resulted in the global decline in the global oil demand being 5%, which is biggest since the Great Depression of 1930. We have had some very unprecedented events in the fossil fuel markets, particularly the oil market, one of them being the negative oil prices for the first time in history ever. That has happened on April 20, and caused by the low demand and oversupply of the oil on the market. The second blow to the oil markets has been the drop in the oil price. It has been negative, as you have seen, and the average oil price forecasted for this year is approximately half of what the oil price has been last year. And it's not a good thing even for those who would like to profit on cheap oil and stock some more for the future, because the storages are almost full currently, and it's very difficult to fill even more oil for the future. The similar pattern we can see with the global coal demand, which has fallen by 8% compared to the first quarter of the last year. Main reasons for that being cheap gas and renewables growth. So for the electricity generation, particularly, coal has been cut off, and also some very mild weather in many countries has driven the demand for coal in winter and spring further down. And another major reason is that many utilities cut back on coal intentionally because given the right policies in place, it is more expensive than gas or renewables. Well, one might think that all these dramatic changes to the fossil fuel markets is something actually good for the future of the sustainable energy system, because it shows how vulnerable and fragile these markets are and gives a way forward to the low carbon energy. But unfortunately, the negative effects caused to these fossil fuel markets have also a major effect on the energy system in total, and also the low carbon energy sector. Maybe the most dramatic negative effect being the cut of global investments in the energy sector. It is expected for, first of all, for 2020, 2021, what the long-term effects will be, we don't know yet. But for this and next year, we see that the largest multinational enterprises in the energy sector announced minus 208% in earnings revisions, which means they will have less and less money to invest in new energy projects. And then we have the utilities, such as the power generation, power transmission companies that usually invest in the energy infrastructure and energy generation facilities. Their slump in electricity demand and the consequent decline of income of these companies up to 70% affects their ability to invest in short and medium term as well. The next negative effect we see is the economic and possible future political instability of the major oil exporting countries such as Nigeria, Algeria, Russia, and many other countries. The problem with that is, of course, also that these countries, even if they had any low carbon energy development programs, they have less and less ability to do so in the next year or two because they don't have enough income. And last but not least, the least developed countries, of course, are affected the most by these developments, since also their main trade and development aid partners, such as the EU, China, or the United States, are in the deepest economic crisis right now and cannot deliver on supporting their sustainable energy systems. So these problems are really widespread and not only in the fossil fuel sector. But we see a glimmer of hope when we look at the renewable energies. Compared or contrary to the oil and coal markets, we see 1.5% growth of renewable energy use in all sectors compared to the first quarter of the last year. And in some countries, renewables even start to dominate the power generation, particularly in the European Union. We can see that in France, Germany, Ireland, and in Great Britain, and we see more and more often the negative spot, and they had electricity prices. So the renewables are dominant in the power generation sector and as cheap as ever. For the United States, for example, the Energy Information Agency forecasts that renewables will overtake coal in power generation for the first time ever this year. The demand for renewables is furthermore likely to increase given their low operating costs and if preferential access to many power systems. So if the country has policies in place that will allow preferential access for the renewables like feed and trade or something similar, then they will have even more way ahead of the fossil fuels. And additionally, there are some additional capacities coming online in 2020, which will probably further boost the deployment of renewable energy generation. Last but not least, as we have seen, the drop of in the fossil fuel consumption has resulted, and also the drop in mobility, of course, has resulted in the greatest drop of CO2 emissions in the history of humankind, probably. It has dropped, it is expected to drop 8% in 2020 to the levels of 10 years ago. And the range of this drop is twice as big as all the drops during the previous crisis, such as financial crisis, second oil shock, and World War II. Altogether. So the drop in the global carbon emissions has been major, which is a very good thing, but also a very temporary thing. And governments and communities have to think about how to prevent the reverse of this trend. We have, given the COVID-19 crisis, many challenges for the global energy transition, further development of the sustainable energy system. First of all, the further build out of renewables is at risk because supply chains in solar and wind power have been disrupted. For example, solar panels, most of which are being manufactured in China, cannot be delivered on time right now, or could not be delivered on time in the earlier this year due to the lockdowns and closure of borders. The materials such as steel for wind turbines for the European industry, the US industry, could also not be delivered. So these disruptions are rather dramatic. Not only the renewable generation industry, but for example, the electronic vehicle industry comes to a halt right now. Furthermore, construction sites are hindered by the lockdown since they prevent free movement of staff and materials, which is particularly drastic for projects which are in the early stage of development. As I also already mentioned, the investment capacity of the utilities and other companies is shrinking because the power prices are low and their incomes are decreased. And then last but not least, although renewable energy or renewable electricity generated from the renewable energy sources is rather cheap right now, we still have very, very cheap oil, gas, and coal prices. And in countries where there are no policies in place to sustain or support the introduction of renewable generation capacities, they may even win the upper hand compared to the renewables. So this might be a potential problem as well. Nevertheless, the most international organizations, most think tanks see that the renewables will continue to grow despite the global economic crisis and the multiple crises inflicted by the COVID-19. since in many countries the growth of renewables is already driven by the market, and given the falling oil, coal, and gas prices, investment in renewable sector and electrification infrastructure such as power grids, mini grids, and so on becomes as attractive as ever for companies. And then we see that major oil companies that started already to invest in renewables make an even bigger shift to investing in the low carbon sector, because they see that the investments in oil and coal and gas production and transmission infrastructure are not sustainable in the long term. The COVID crisis has shown that very clearly. So there is, after all, some money coming for the low carbon energy sector. Why can we say that renewables have the upper hand in the post-COVID world? There are many reasons for that. 4 of them are listed below. First of all, the renewables can create more jobs than fossil fuels, and particularly help smaller businesses and households to save money if they equip themselves with some mini or off-grid solutions and gain cheaper renewable electricity for their operations. The renewable energy systems can help increase resilience to future crises, make countries less dependent on the energy imports, like fossil fuel energy imports, can make the countries less dependent on the sustainable access to energy resources, and so on. Particularly important is that low carbon energy system is a central means to supporting the healthcare system and isolated population in the least developed countries. Micro and mini grids, decentralized solutions are key here. And off-grid solar, for example, are often cleaner, more reliable, and cheaper than the existing diesel generators. A very important point here is also access to clean cooking. Securing access to the off-grid or on-grid electrified solutions allows not only to increase access to clean cooking, but also to reduce the vulnerability to respiratory illnesses such as COVID-19. We know already now that populations that already had some illness history and some other respiratory illnesses are more prone to be infected by COVID-19. So if we decrease the share of population that has these illnesses, we also increase the resilience of the population to such viruses as COVID-19. And then last but not least, we have seen in the past weeks and months how the skies have cleared and waterways have suddenly become transparent, and this picture I think is a very powerful long-term reminder of what environmental impact is being caused by the fossil fuel consumption. And even after the crisis has passed, people will remember this picture of clean cities, clean air, and will probably think about ways how to sustain this. So there is a list of course it's not complete. There are just suggestions, a list for what the governments need to do. The governments have the central role here indeed, because now it's up to them to create or to draft the stimulus packages, to give economic support to the affected communities and companies. And it's up to them what companies will be supported, in what way the communities will be supported. So it is very important, or the way governments will devise their policies in the next month and maybe even years is very important. First of all, they have to fast track electricity access for healthcare facilities and critical government operations, particularly in countries where electricity access is not universal. One of the solutions would be modular solar with battery storage, which is not connected to the central grid, also in countries where grid integration is not that progressed. Promote clean cooking solutions in countries with low access to clean cooking is very important, particularly under the conditions of the lockdown, for example, where for example, if you take India, where the most vulnerable groups of population have been women and children who have to stay indoors longer and are occupied with cooking. The vulnerable groups have become larger because the whole families are now on the lockdown, and we don't know how long this how long these conditions will last and whether they will repeat in the future. So in the long term, promoting clean cooking solutions is important, not just for the post-crisis world, but in the preparedness for the possible future crisis. Recovery measures and stimulus packages have to be given to the utilities in particular, and energy companies who are willing and able to promote the sustainable development of energy sector. For example, companies with voluntary emission reduction targets or their own green policies. Protection measures also have to be introduced to the poorest energy consumers who are not able to pay their bills on time now, given the crisis, through, for example, bill waivers and other policies. Then very important, we have to prevent the rebound of the CO2 emissions surge through maybe a new wave of low carbon investments supported by the green policies, because as soon as the lockdown will be loosened and the mobility will go on again, we'll have the same problem again, that the CO2 will surge, and we'll have to prevent that somehow. Then the governments will probably have to invest in national clean tech infrastructure and innovation, because given that the supply chains in low carbon sector are being disrupted right now, that the panels and other equipment cannot be delivered on time, the materials cannot be delivered on time, it is of strategic importance for the countries to start thinking about their own renewable manufacturing base, in fact.
Maria, can we just have
the last slide, maybe?
Yeah.
So that's the government part, but I think the communities have a very central role in that. First of all, what they have a need to do is, of course, to listen carefully to what government does and does not, and to inform the population maybe that has less access to this information about new possibilities within stimulus packages. What are the new waivers they can use? What are the new economic packages they can gain about this kind of things? Of course, it is very important to raise awareness among the population regarding their own possibilities to produce energy, for example, through the off-grid solutions, and to secure their own well-being. And it is very important, it's central, in fact, for them to maintain the constant dialogue with the governments, push them to implement these necessary policies with particular focus on issues that are most relevant for the communities, such as the clean cooking fuels, quality of the electricity access to the internet, etc. I'm very sorry if I was talking for too long, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was terrific, and we would really appreciate your presentation on, especially on the renewable energy, which is very sustainable, unlike the oil and carbon and the regular means of energy. So I think this is a very important way forward for all of us to think about it, and we also need to invest more on the renewable energy. So thank you so much, and I'm so sorry for stopping you and cutting short your presentation, because we have a next presentation. And and after that, after this next presentation, we will go for the question and answer session. So may I please request Mr. Joshua to speak on, especially on synthesis and call for action. Mr. Joshua, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for all the presenters who spoke earlier. My role is was to listen carefully to what everyone has said in the past, and try to bring it all together to also help with the Q&A afterwards. And I'll try to take us back to the theme of the webinar, which is very forward-looking into the future, and how we can provide a planet that is habitable for everyone. So sustaining economy, public health, and environment for the future of humanity. After listening to all the presentation, and thanks to everyone who presented and the input that you provided, there are some key things that I will leave as the synthesis of it, and then I will look at the call to action as well. So one thing that cut across all the presentations so far has been investment. And this is very important. Based on a research that I did last year together with the Global Center on Adaptation, which was also a synthesis on young people and the role they play in facilitating climate adaptation for the future. And I'm happy that Shalia is here because I was also with her at the adaptation committee meeting last year, where we were also talking about disaster risk reduction, gender integration, and youth integration towards protecting the climate, but also as well as enhancing adaptation and what young people have, the role young people have to play. So I'm going to go over the call for action, which is broken into two sections. One is what we on the call can do, leaving this call, what you can actually do. And the other bit is what we can also put forward as demands to government on what they need to do. So I'm going to start with the top level, what governments need to do from everything I've heard so far, and putting strong focus on the futuristic part of the webinar. So one big theme I will leave for us in terms of the work we do and what we are asking government will be a transformation. Listening to the last presentation, particularly Maria, thanks for what you said around what needs to be done from the government side. Transformation is needed, particularly in the financial sector. We need investment, transformation or financial transformation. And this means that we need, as young people, to demand that governments are exposing the banks we are giving our money to, they are exposing where they are investing our money. So if you want to really transform the fossil fuel industry and move the whole country or the whole world towards renewables, we need to make sure that banks and the pension schemes are not investing our money in the fossil fuel sector. If not, none of the policies that are coming up is probably going to work, because there will still be enough money for investment towards the fossil fuel sector, which does not allow us to grow. So this is something that we can put forward to government, to our banking institutions, to where we save our money, and say that, guys, we need to know what you do with our money. Where are you investing our money? Is it going into the green sector? Is it going into the clean technologies? This will be very important. Another transformation which is needed is transformation in education and vocational skills. So as also said by the last speaker, Maria, talking about we need to innovate and we need to transform the energy sector, but we need certain skills to be able to do that. And majority of young people who are going through the current education system are being taught things of the past and not the knowledge they need for the future that is ahead of us. So again, towards the theme of the webinar, which is providing a safer future for the environment, for humanity, we need the skills for the future and not the skills for the past. So it is good that we learn from the past, but we need to transform the education sector, say that we are being provided knowledge and the technical skills to innovate and to create and to build new systems that allow us to have this safe future. And this is currently not happening. So we still spend a lot of our curriculum focuses on theories of the past without putting so much emphasis on what we need to transform the future. So this is very important. Now, the third thing which I'll talk about is communities and not corporations. And this is coming strongly from what Hindu talked about, the indigenous communities and facing double vulnerability, which is not only for indigenous communities, but also as young people, we face this. We face double vulnerabilities. We are facing it now. In the next 30 years, there's going to be severe climate impacts. The outcome of COVID cannot even be extrapolated. And all this impact is something we will face now, where the current leadership of the world will not face the same impact. So this double vulnerability can only be solved if we are giving enough power to communities and not to these multinational companies, not to corporations. How do we do this? As young people, putting our demands forward, and also in the work we do as young people as well. We need to put more power, more knowledge, more education, more skills to young people, to communities, that communities understand and be able to take ownership of their own development. So for instance, I'm currently working on a project where we call the Sustainable Communities Project, where we are making investment goes to communities rather than having a private sector company come to a community, say an indigenous community, start mining and only employing people without having any share of profits going to local people. This has to stop. And this is something that we can also put forward, that there should be emphasis on communities, such that, as Hindu said, communities will have their own resources to provide infrastructure for them, to provide the things they need in times of crisis, that they are able to adapt, and they do not have to solely depend on central government or development aid to come to their rescue. Now, this is what we can demand from government. What can we as young people do as part of our daily work? One important thing which came out from all the presentations again is togetherness. So the key point here will be collaboration. It's already very evident that young people do not have all the resources they need to be able to do the work that they seek to do, which means that having small organizations and smaller initiatives by different young people makes it even more difficult. Hence, there's a strong need that we come together, collaborate, and be able to support each other with the little resources we have to be able to act on all the things I talked about that we need to demand from government. We can also start acting on this if we come together. The next point is that we need to be able to put policy recommendations forward. And this is a call to action for all of you to be able to do. Of course, the situation at hand is very, very context specific. COVID is affecting every community differently in every country. So even within the same country, one community faces differently from another community. We need to contextualize this global impact to the local level and be able to put up policy recommendations with our community leaders and also to the central government. Because in most cases, there is no platform that allows young people to really make inputs to government initiatives. And hence, through policy recommendations, we will be able to put the message out there. And this could go through making an article piece, putting a policy recommendation in a news article on your own blog, and making this information available and sharing and using the power of social media as well to spread, to say that, look, we want to drive investment towards the green sector. If everyone is talking about it and there is unity and collaboration between the different youth initiatives, this will make it easier for us to work together. The last thing I will leave is accountability on the side of we young people, that as part of the work we do, we need to also demonstrate accountability and as well be able to seek accountability from the side of our governments. And this will be very important as well, to be able to know, as Maria also said earlier, to be able to know that communities must pay attention to what government is doing and what government cannot do, or what government is not doing. And this is the aspect of accountability that we can do, because first of all, we are majority of the population. If we really seek to see a change and we all come together and say that, okay, we want investment to move from response to preparedness, this was going to happen. And I'm taking this from Charlie as well, that young people have a role to play in disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. But we should focus even more on preparedness, such that we don't even have to respond more and we don't even have to recover from more damages. But we are well prepared that we can absorb the shocks of such disasters that happen, and we are more adaptive to these problems and these challenges that are going to come because of a changing climate. So this will be my input, and I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joshua, for your very inspiring synthesis. And I completely agree that we really need to show our accountability and seek accountability from the government, and from not only from the government, but all the stakeholders that we work for and our communities. That is the most important. So, and the role of youth is very important in all those presentations that we have discussed since the beginning of this session. And I truly appreciate your thoughts. And we have now we have some time for question and answer session. So as you know that we have had four very terrific presentations. We had presentation from the UNSCAP. We had presentation from especially on the biodiversity and impact on COVID, and then we had presentation on the role of indigenous people and their contribution, and then we had presentation on energy sector. We had presentation on the disaster risk management. So we have all very good presenters here. I hope all of you are staying here. And may I just request the participants, if you have any question, please come up with the questions. I can see some of the questions in the chat box here, but may I just request the questions one by one, and you can just unmute yourself and ask your question. Is it okay? And then our presenters, we have all the presenters here, so they may answer your questions. I saw present a question from Chakma Membership Secretary Bangladesh Indigenous Women's Network. So if you have a question. Hi Chanchana, are you here?
Oh yes. Thank you, Josna. I'd like to raise here in Bangladesh, Chittagong Hill Tracts indigenous people, they are facing a lot of problem like food crisis and equipment of COVID-19 tests in Chittagong Hill Tracts. There is no ventilator. Then I'd like to ask how we can raise funds for help them, and how can we pressure create the government to support equipment and other instrument in Chittagong Hill Tracts. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your question. Is this present question addressed to one particular speaker, or is this a general question that any speaker would want to address?
Especially Saila Madam, who is a speaker from Bangladesh, because she is from Bangladesh, and also you, because I would like to say how we can help them to resolve the food crisis. Thank you.
Sure. Shaila, are you around?
Yes, Josna.
Please, Shaila, please address this question.
Okay, I just like to, can you repeat the question,
yes,
please?
I will just read it. She wrote, she has a question, is we indigenous people in Chittagong, most remote area in indigenous people, we are facing multiple problems such as COVID problem and food crisis, lack of COVID-19 test equipment or ventilators. How can we fundraise for them globally?
I think this is a situation that most of the indigenous community they are facing all over the world, and this is not the situation only that particular context. I mean, in the Chittagong Hill Tracts region, this sort of information we are also receiving from other parts of the country. And you know the situation of Bangladesh, the government is really trying to provide support to those far-reaching people, and our government already declared different level of stimulus packages to extend support. Especially, we also have a different level of social safety net support exists in the country, but unfortunately, this is very appalling situation, particularly for the Chittagong Hill Tracts people, because they don't have that level of health structures available. They don't have that technical and very well equipped health-related access and services exist in that particular location, and for the number of indigenous community who resides there. From my side, it's very difficult to respond to the system, but definitely the government is trying to channelize all this sort of support to those people, how they can reach to them. And this is very crucial issues to mobilize the global support and request the donor community and other community to come up with some sort of fundraising for the most downtrodden and stranded people who are most affected by this initial situation of this COVID-19, and also that is coupled with a different level of disaster. But I think there are the indigenous community, we have separate departments. They are trying to provide support to them, but this is a global call. I completely agree with them, and I also declare my solidarity and support for the indigenous indigenous community in the Chittagong Hill Tracts. And this is very important that at the global level, there are many people. We need to come up with some strategic directions in terms of how we can extend the social safety net and social protection support to them. And I also believe there should have a separate stimulus package that needs to be declared by the government and by the international community, how they can reach to those indigenous community. So we are all are in favor of this sort of demand, and from my side, we are working for this and raising our voice. But definitely the strategic content and the way the next steps needs to be taken, that needs to work at the national level for as a first response to support those sort of situation. But the absence of ventilator support, the absence of proper healthcare, this is the crisis the whole world is facing at this moment. We need to come up with some radical changes in the whole situation of this structural barrier. So that's actually from my side. We are empathetic, we are in solidarity of those sort of demand, and we are open to work on these sort of issues. And this is a global from my side also. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaila. Dear next participant, if you have any question. I saw a question from Subodh. Subodh, would you like to ask your question? Okay, this question was from Subodh from Nepal, and he says that he works on biodynamic, organic, and indigenous farming. We train indigenous farmers from a spiral farmhouse. Spiral farmhouse is in Spiral Saptari, Nepal, and it's about basically 400 millions are losing their job, and how to help. I think it's a generic question. Any presenter would like to address this question?
Hi. Hello?
Thank you, Nido.
Yes. Thank you very much. I mean, firstly, I would like to add a little bit for the sister from the Bangladesh, because she asked a very important questions, how the peoples who are very far from the, at the rural areas to get a project to help on the ventilators and access to the basic need for the COVID. So I think the most important is you need to put a strategy written down. As your sister from Bangladesh said, they are looking for a strategy. So governments wanted to help, but if government didn't hear from you, they can't help you. If you can put at least 2 pages to explain the problem and to say you don't want to yourself to be left behind, then please mention that in terms of the SDG, leave no one behind. In terms of the health, it's very important for the countries to get access to everyone, and then send this strategy to the government. Second things, you can also just to draft a project or do a video and share it with all the peoples, because most of the project at the international level, regional level, now in turning them funding to support COVID, and they must support you. So for the second questions, the brother from Nepal, that's not the case only for Nepal. Millions of people are losing their job because of the COVID. That is only also why government wanted to inject money in the economy. So they say they wanted to help youth entrepreneurs in the one or another way. So you need to shift the work that you are doing. For the nouns, maybe how the peoples can start doing the basic needs as constructing a mask, because anywhere the world will need the mask ever. So for Nepal is a big country. If some of the peoples are just having 2-3 people to be entrepreneurs to just produce a mask, and then some of them can maybe just to produce ventilators, because there are a lot of youth who are very smart in doing the work. So from this kind of the work, you can shift the job. And at the same time, environment protection is very important. You know, when everyone in the world take the decision that they close the border. The one thing they didn't close, all of them, is food shipping, because they know they are not autosufficient. So if in the Bangladesh, people can be shifting and producing foods, so it can help in Nepal, it can help Nepali peoples to get through foods. And my last advice for you, if you are from the indigenous communities, we do have a facilitative working group for indigenous peoples, for the local community and indigenous peoples platform at the UNFCCC. And one of the representatives, and who is the co-chair, she is from Nepal. She is call it Pasang. So Miss Pasang can be the help person for you to highlight your issues at the international level, at the UN level, to make how you can be contacted by other groups and then do the work. So if you are interested, I think some of us in the calls know Pasang, and then we can put you in contact with her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hindu. And we have more questions. We have another question from Kukamri Grondahi. Are you around?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, please go ahead and ask your question.
Do the biggest change and aren't hurt the most, so that there's some kind of equality, that everyone is held accountable equally?
Sorry, we can't hear you. Ms. Kukamri, we cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is that how do we promote equity in globally in green policy and promoting ecological policies from a government level? So how do we make sure that the most vulnerable communities aren't expected to create the most change and hurt the most? So how do we promote some kind of equity in supporting green policy?
This question is addressed to Maria, I believe.
Yeah, and everyone.
Okay, Maria, would you like to address this question and then to other presenters?
Sure. I would really like to address this question and the question before Nepal as well, very shortly. To this question, I think you already written the answer partially in your comments, because I think it was you who written whether we should focus on ensuring the global equity or focusing on the local and national level. I think given the limited resources each government and even international organizations have nowadays in the face of the crisis, it is much more realistic and probably more efficient in the short term to really focus the efforts of the communities on the local and regional level, and the governments on the national level. To first of all take care of your own communities, to solve the problems that were there and are perhaps exacerbated, like the high qualitative access to electricity and access to clean cooking fuels and so on and so forth. While for the governments it is equally important to of course secure funds to sustain the clean growth of the country, to sustain the development of the sustainable energy system through the international donors, such as the World Bank, for example, or other organizations, through the cooperation with other countries. And it is very important, I couldn't mention it in the presentation because I didn't have much time left. It is very important to particularly watch out for further trade restrictions. We have basically a trade war going on between China and the US right now, and this is crippling the renewable energy sector and the innovative technology sector in many ways. And the same thing can happen if the governments will just start to care about their own economies while also shutting them off from the global markets. That's not what should happen. Caring about local economies, about their own energy growth, sustainable energy growth is very important, but without this isolationist trends. I think that's very important. On the Nepal question, and I think there was another one considering what to do if the government have, because the governments of Nepal have not introduced any stimulus package. Indeed, I'm not the expert, but as far as I know, they have indeed introduced at least relief packages for the poorest groups. The problem with these packages is they are very vaguely formulated for the poorest groups, and they will be given to those who need them, but there is no clear definition what the poorest groups are, like no limit, no income limit, no concrete conditions for that. And I think it's very important, and I would like to underline what the previous speakers already said. It's very important to communicate to the governments what is actually needed, what groups are in the direst straits, and what groups need the most support. So this bottom-up communication is very important here. And then the government of Nepal, for example, has signed a financing agreement with the World Bank for the coronavirus response, which focuses not on green energy, but on more on the public health and delivering equipment and so on and so forth. So it is probably also very important, knowing that the government will have this money, to communicate and to try to deliver to the government the message of where is it most needed, where these masks and this equipment is really needed, and that's maybe the central thing that the communities could do at the present moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Will other speakers would like to address this question? Okay. If no, we have questions. Other question from Rajkumar. Rajkumar, are you here? Would you want to ask question? It's from Gujarat. It's about Gujarat state. Okay, then we'll move to another question about from Al Hassan Tahiru. Al Hassan, are you here? I think the question is about the mineral resource, including gold, diamond, etc. The natural resource needed for more than ever now in food, and it was basically contribution about the onus therefore falls on all of us to empower ourselves to venture into agriculture, irrespective of how much money is injected into the economy. If not put into the essential ventures like agriculture, very little to or no impact will be seen. So I don't see any other question. If you have any other question, any participant, if you have any question addressed to any particular speaker, you are welcome to come forward and ask your question. Yes, please, Mr. Dion. Dion, you have a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I came a little bit late, but I caught the last few moments. And I just wanted to ask a question in regards to post-COVID-19, how the framework of youth engagement, participation, and advocacy is going to look like, given that now the processes are being restructured a lot from a political to economic and otherwise scientific perspective. But for the youth agenda, I'm not now too sure what's going to happen with our work during post-COVID. So I just wanted to ask from the panelists, how do we monetize the youth skills during these times in order to supplement that workforce that would be much needed to accelerate a lot of economies and help them leapfrog based on how they got damaged due to COVID-19, and then use the ability and energy of the young people, and also at a much cheaper cost, I would say, than they would normally would, given that most of us are at a very high level of unemployment globally. And now the world is actually seeking to resuscitate itself. So I want to know from that perspective, how do we move around that and create a value proposition for the youth argument so that young people are not post-COVID-19 anymore on the sidelines of charities and donations and commemoration and stuff like that is when they often include us, but to actually look at us as immediate stakeholders that are needed right now to accelerate a lot of the changes that we're looking for. So I think that's my question. It's not entirely specific, but I think I just thought about it and realized it's something the world needs to start asking itself, because the youth themselves, if the world is suffering, we are at the bottom of that whole process. And being the base, it's time we become functional to some extent. So yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Please, Ms. Hindu, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the questions. Actually, that's what we need to see the way forward. I think to prepare the post-COVID, we need to start now. And as you are hearing, many people in the world talking on green recovery. So they are talking about how they can shift to all the transformational way of our world after COVID. And I think the place of use is very important to start from now. I give you the example on the Friday for Futures. Use in all over the world, just standing up outside every Friday. But now they are using the platform of the social media. And I also have been the one who participating in one of the webinars. So just like sharing with the youth through all the social media, posting it through all the rest of the media who are not socials, and then try to share the information to start like saying, we are there. This is the first important part. To remind all the governments, private sectors, UN institutions, other institutions that we are there and we is still there and we remain in our positions. It is our present and it is our futures. So this is very important message to be passed from now. And then the second is how you can all show that you are contributing, because that's what the world wanted to know. If you are contributing and then you are giving the value add in the life, so you have to be part of the decisions for the designing of the features. And to do so, so show all your best practices that you are doing through media, share it with the people, try to organize webinar, even if you have just 2 person, 3 person that attending, and try to share it. Because anyway, you cannot stand up, you cannot march, you cannot take your band outside and say we need job, or say like you have to invest on green. So you have to use the media that you do have. And then the third one is how you can access to the funding to do the activities that you need as youth, how you can access to the educations. So in the funding part, so the government that's giving funding, the organization that's giving funding, always make sure to highlight the information that youth need to be in the center of each decisions. Youth need to access to this funding. And if you know that you are watching them, so they will make a box for you. Second, on the educations, there are many youth that taking the classes online, but most of the youth do not have this access. So that's creating inequality. So how does inequality can fill the box? So it's to just tell the world that it is the formal education who is working for everybody. So how the informal can be part of our world. So this informal can be the exchange among the youth from the South. Exchange the youth in Kenya, why not? Youth from the Kenya can exchange with the youth from the Uganda, and then that can help them to see where is our place. And as Joshua said, youth are the most big global populations, especially in the South. So if we show them the leadership, the future will be for us. So try to do that. It is very hard, but we must do that to design the future with them. Finally, this part of the green recovery. So when everyone want to have the sexy word, yes, green recovery, let us do the green recovery. But what is the green recovery? I think as youth, we must define the narrative of the green recovery now, and from each country, from each nation, to tell them, when you say green recovery, it's not using our nature to build your solutions. No way. Green recovery for us is stop fossil fuel. Green recovery for us is stop coal mining. Green recovery for us, invest on the youth who are doing the sustainable activities, invest on our knowledge and put us in the center. So if you define like a green recovery by 2-3 sentences, and we try to share that in the social media, you know how the powerful of the social media, the TV will take them, the radio will take them, and then the flow, the information saying, oh, the youth wanted to define the green recovery. And at the end of the day, we are designing the features and we are being in the center of the decisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other speaker would want to give any, would want to explain this further? Okay. If not, may I request speakers, all of the speakers to kindly give just 1 minute conclusion and your final remark before we end the session. And with this, may I request Ms. Hindu again to give just 1 minute remark on your takeaway or experience.
Yeah. Firstly, thank you very much for organizing these webinars. That's really what we need, and we need to be all together, even we are far. And I think the most important is the lesson learned from COVID. If the world can react in very fast way because of the COVID, so we can act and react in a very fast way for the climate change. So the nature is our solutions. The nature is our present, our future. So we must protect it and protect the indigenous people that protect the nature. And I think we can transform our world in a better way. And thank you very much for moderating, and thanks again. I will be very happy to follow up with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hindu. Protecting indigenous and protecting nature. That's what my takeaway. Thank you so much. And may I request our next speaker, Mr. Christian, can you just give your 1 minute remark?
Yes, thank you. So I guess, at least from my end, my key takeaway would be that between the presentations, there was definitely a highlight of the role of different stakeholders and also responsibilities of government, including, key and often marginalized stakeholder groups such as women and youth in both the COVID-19 and environmental nexuses that share a lot of similarities and call to attention a lot of similar and cross-cutting issues, such as energy and, in the case of my presentation, biodiversity. And I think this has been a very important and interesting webinar, and thank you for my participation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The role of all the stakeholders and the government and youth and all the stakeholders, very important. We all deserve accountability, and we are all supposed to give accountability. Thank you so much. And may I request Shaila to give your 1 minute remark, your final takeaway, or your introspection on the whole session. Shaila, can you hear me? Okay, I think we are not able to connect to Shaila. May I request Maria to please give your remark? And then I try to connect Shaila.
Sure. Very big thanks to all speakers and participants for the presentations and questions. I've learned a lot myself during this webinar. My final remarks on my topic would be, we have seen also from the presentation that COVID-19 is a crisis in many respects and has fostered some many dramatic negative developments. But when it comes to green growth and promoting the Sustainable Development Goal number 7, which is sustainable energy, it is definitely an opportunity, and it is up to the governments to devise the right policies to use this opportunity, and it is up even more to the communities to push the governments for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Yes, goal 17 on renewable energy, and so we are all in solidarity with this. And may I request Shaila? Shaila, are you here? Okay, so I think we lost Shaila again. Maybe there are some network issue. But thank you so much, all of you, for your presence. And if you still have any question, you can write to Youth Foundation, the people, and you can write to them. I'm sure that they will contact to all the presenters and they will get back to your questions. And this is just one session. I will continue our discussion. And thank you so much, Youth Foundation, everyone, for this very good seminar, very good deliberation, and the role of youth in all. And so hope to see you, hope to meet you all again in next webinar. And thank you so much for now.
We have closing remarks from
from Anish. I'm sorry to have missed it. Anish, we have a closing remark from Youth Foundation. Anish.
Soni Rai from YFIT, she will speak on closing remarks.
I'm sorry. Okay. So yes, we have a closing remark from Miss Soni Rai, who is the board member and director of Youth Foundation.
Thank you, Jyotsna.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Jyotsna. Hello and namaste everyone. I'm Soni Rai from the YFIT Foundation. First of all, I would like to give an immense thanks to our co-organized partner, the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth. Then I would like to give a very big thanks to our 4 panelists who provided the time despite their busy schedule and shared their knowledge, experiences, and insightful perspective on today's topic. Then I would also like to thank Jyotsna for wonderfully moderating today's session. Also, I would like to remember all our friends who are assisting us in today's session. Last but not the least, thank you very much to all the participants from all over the world for your time and your attention. Thank you very much. I hope you had a fruitful discussion. Now, I'd like to quickly add my personal reflection on today's topic. If we look back, I think the most, the kind of changes we have seen, like on climate change, on biodiversity, and on disaster risks, all kinds of problems has been caused by the human and the human behavior. So I urge all the people and all the youths all around the world to be very responsible and make smart choices, like going for reusable and recyclable products. In that way, we can help to solve a lot of problems. So thank you for tuning us in today's session. We hope you had a very great time. Also, I would like to apologize for all the technical errors and for delay. Thank you so much. Now over to you, Jyotsna.
Thank you, Soni, once again for your very valuable remark. And my apologies for missing you on this. So yes, it's a very, very good webinar, a very good session actually on the role of youth in all this, in biodiversity, in energy, and disaster risk management, and how they can play a very important role in the time of pandemic like COVID. So I'm sure you all come up with your innovative ideas, and we hope to see you, meet you somewhere on another platform, virtual or face-to-face. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye. Thank you, bye-bye everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Bye, thank you, bye.
Thanks a lot, bye.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.